Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about strength, real strength, not the kind you can find in the gym or show off in front of a crowd, but the kind that carries you through the hardest, darkest days of your life. The strength that only comes through God's grace. Strength begins when we surrender to God's plan, not our own. It's a simple concept, but one that goes against our human nature. We're wired to rely on ourselves, to plan, to strategize, and to feel in control. From a young age, we're taught to set goals, work hard, and make things happen. But what happens when life doesn't go according to plan? What happens when the doors we thought would open stay shut, or when the things we've built come crashing down? That's when we face a critical decision to keep pushing forward in our own strength or to step back, surrender, and trust God's plan. Surrender doesn't come easily. It feels like giving up, doesn't it? But surrendering to God is not the same as quitting. In fact, it's the opposite. It's choosing to trust that God's plan for your life is better than anything you could imagine for yourself. It's admitting that no matter how capable or intelligent you are, you cannot see the full picture. Only God can, and that takes real humility. It's not a sign of weakness to admit that we don't have all the answers. It's a sign of wisdom. It's saying, God, I trust you more than I trust myself. I trust that your ways are higher than mine, and that your plans for me are good, even when I don't understand them. Think about the times in your life when you've tried to force things to happen. Maybe it was a job opportunity, a relationship, or a big decision. You worked harder, pushed further, and tried to control every detail, but it still didn't work out. How did that make you feel? Frustrated, angry, or even defeated. That's because we were never meant to carry the weight of life on our own shoulders. God designed us to rely on Him, to walk in step with His Spirit, and to trust that He knows what's best for us. It's in that moment of surrender when we stop striving and start trusting that we find true strength. Surrendering to God's plan doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. It doesn't mean you stop working hard or pursuing your goals. Instead, it means you align your heart and your efforts with His will. You let Him take the lead, and that changes everything. Suddenly, the weight of fear and anxiety begins to lift. The pressure to make everything happen on your own starts to fade. You begin to see that it's not all up to you, and that's a good thing because God's resources are infinite and His wisdom is perfect. When you surrender to God's plan, you also open the door to His blessings. You make room for Him to do what only He can do. Sometimes it looks like closed doors because He's protecting you from something you can't see. Sometimes it means waiting longer than you'd like because He's preparing you for something greater. And sometimes it means unexpected opportunities or miracles that you never saw coming. But you can't receive those blessings if you're holding tightly to your own plan. Surrendering means letting go so that God can fill your hands with His best. It's also important to understand that surrender is a daily decision. It's not a one-time thing. Every day you have to choose to trust God over yourself. Every day you have to remind yourself that His plan is better. And that's not always easy, especially when you're faced with challenges or when you're tempted to take matters into your own hands. But that's where faith comes in. Faith says, I don't have to see the whole path. I just need to take the next step that God is calling me to take. And as you do, you'll find that God's strength begins to fill the places where your strength ends. God's grace is the anchor in life's storms, offering unwavering support. When the winds of uncertainty blow, when the waves of fear and doubt rise, and when it feels like everything around you is falling apart, it is God's grace that holds you steady. The truth is, life is unpredictable. No matter how much we plan or prepare, we cannot control every outcome. Challenges come, unexpected losses occur, and hardships knock us off balance. But grace, God's infinite and unmerited favor, is the one constant that never falters. It is the anchor that keeps us grounded when life tries to toss us into chaos. Grace is not something we earn. It's not a reward for good behavior or perfect faith. It is a gift of free, boundless, and immeasurable gift from God. It doesn't depend on your ability to be strong or your capacity to figure things out. It depends solely on God's love for you, which never wavers. When life feels overwhelming and you're at the end of your rope, His grace meets you right there. It is in those moments when you feel most helpless that you realize the strength and sufficiency of God's grace. His power is made perfect in our weakness, not in our self-reliance. Think about the storms in your life. Maybe it's the loss of a job, a broken relationship, a financial crisis, or a health challenge. These storms have a way of exposing our vulnerabilities. They remind us that we're not as in control as we thought we were. And while that realization can feel scary, it's also liberating because it's in those moments of realization that grace steps in. Grace doesn't eliminate the storm, but it gives you the strength to withstand it. It steadies your heart, calms your mind, and reminds you that you're not alone. Imagine being in a literal storm at sea. The waves are high, the winds are fierce, and your boat feels like it could capsize at any moment. What do you need in that moment? You need an anchor, something strong and immovable that keeps you from drifting into danger. That's what God's grace is in the storms of life. It holds you firm no matter how fierce the winds may blow. It doesn't mean the storm disappears. It means you're secure within it. You can have peace, not because the circumstances are easy, but because God's grace sustains you. God's grace also gives you perspective in the storm. When you're in the thick of it, it's hard to see anything beyond the chaos. But grace helps you lift your eyes above the waves and focus on the one who has power over the storm. It reminds you that the storm isn't the end of the story. God's grace is working in ways you can't yet see. It's strengthening your faith, building your character, and preparing you for what's ahead. It turns the storm from something destructive into something transformative. Grace doesn't just anchor you, it empowers you. It gives you the courage to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. It helps you take the next step, no matter how small, because you trust that God's grace will meet you there. And as you keep moving, you begin to see that His grace is not only sufficient, but abundant. It's more than enough to carry you through whatever you're facing. The beautiful thing about grace is that it's not just for the big, obvious storms. It's for the quiet struggles, the hidden battles, and the everyday challenges. It's there when you feel anxious about the future, when you're wrestling with self-doubt, and when you're simply trying to make it through another day. No matter the size of the storm, God's grace is the same, steady, unwavering, and always sufficient. Faith in God turns trials into triumphs, shaping us into His purpose. Trials are an inevitable part of life. They come in various forms: heartbreak, financial challenges, health struggles, or moments of uncertainty when the future seems murky. In those times, it's easy to question why these trials are happening and to feel overwhelmed by their weight. But faith in God shifts our perspective. It takes what looks like a setback and reframes it as part of a larger divine plan. It reminds us that trials are not meaningless. They are tools God uses to shape us, refine us, and bring us closer to the purpose He has for our lives. When you have faith, you begin to see trials differently. You start to understand that they are not punishments or random misfortunes, but opportunities for growth. Faith doesn't deny the pain or difficulty of a trial, but it gives it meaning. It says, this isn't the end. This is a step towards something greater. Faith allows you to trust that even when you can't see the full picture, God is working behind the scenes. He's using the very thing that seems to be breaking you to build you into the person He created you to be. Consider the imagery of a potter working with clay. The clay doesn't take shape without pressure, without molding, and without being placed in the fire. It's not a pleasant process, but it's necessary to create something beautiful and strong. That's what trials are in our lives. They are the hands of the master potter shaping us, removing impurities, and preparing us for His purpose. Faith is what allows us to endure the pressure and trust the process. It keeps us grounded in the belief that the pain is temporary and that something good is being created through it. Faith also shifts our focus during trials. Instead of dwelling on what we've lost or what's going wrong, faith directs our eyes to God and His promises. It reminds us of His faithfulness in the past and His assurance that He will never leave us or forsake us. When we focus on God instead of the problem, we begin to see His strength working in our weakness. We start to experience His peace, which surpasses all understanding, and His joy, even in the midst of difficulty. Faith doesn't remove the trial, but it changes how we walk through it. It gives us hope, courage, and the strength to keep going. Trials have a way of revealing what's truly in our hearts. They strip away the superficial and expose our deepest fears, doubts, and insecurities. While that can be uncomfortable, it's also a gift because it allows God to address those areas and bring healing and growth. Faith invites God into those broken places. It says, Lord, I don't understand, but I trust You. Use this trial to make me more like You. And when we approach trials with that attitude, they become a catalyst for transformation. Triumph doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it's not about the trial being resolved the way we want, but about the change that happens within us. It's about becoming stronger, more compassionate, more resilient, and more aligned with God's will. Faith helps us see that triumph is not just about external victory, but about internal growth. It's about knowing that no matter what happens, we are secure in God's love and plan for our lives. The Bible is full of examples of people who turned trials into triumphs through faith. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned, yet he trusted God's purpose. In the end, his trials positioned him to save countless lives. David faced countless obstacles before becoming king, but his faith in God carried him through. These stories remind us that trials are often the prelude to God's greatest work in our lives. Faith doesn't just help us endure trials, it transforms them into stepping stones toward the purpose God has for us. Through every challenge, God provides the strength to persevere, showing His faithfulness. Life often brings moments where the weight of circumstances feels unbearable. Challenges come in many forms, from personal setbacks to external pressures that seem insurmountable. In those moments, it's easy to feel alone, to wonder if you have the strength to move forward, and to question whether God is truly present. But it is in these exact moments of doubt and struggle that God demonstrates His unchanging faithfulness and provides the strength we need to keep going. God's faithfulness is not just a concept, it's a reality that reveals itself through every trial we face. When challenges come, they have a way of stripping us of the illusion that we can handle life on our own. They force us to confront our limits, and in doing so, they point us to God's unlimited power. His faithfulness means that He doesn't abandon us when we're weak. Instead, He meets us in our weakness, offering us the strength to persevere. It's not about our ability to endure, it's about His power working through us. The strength God provides is not always an immediate solution to the challenge or an instant removal of the burden. Instead, it's often a quiet, steady strength that helps us take the next step, even when the road ahead feels uncertain. This strength comes from His Spirit living within us, reminding us of His promises and sustaining us with His peace. It's the kind of strength that allows us to face each day with hope, even when the circumstances haven't yet changed. It's the assurance that no matter how tough the battle, God is walking alongside us, equipping us for whatever lies ahead. Perseverance is not just about enduring hardship, it's about trusting that God has a purpose in every challenge. Each difficulty we encounter is an opportunity to grow in faith and character. It's a chance to lean into God's promises and to experience His power in new ways. Challenges test our faith, but they also strengthen it, deepening our reliance on God and teaching us to trust Him in all circumstances. Every time we persevere through a challenge with God's strength, we become more resilient, more faithful, and more attuned to His presence in our lives. God's faithfulness is evident in how He provides exactly what we need at the right time. Sometimes it's through His Word, which offers encouragement and guidance. A verse that speaks directly to our situation can be a lifeline, reminding us that He sees us, knows us, and is working for our good. Other times, His faithfulness is shown through people He places in our lives, friends, family, or even strangers who offer support, wisdom, or comfort when we need it most. These are not coincidences, they are tangible expressions of God's care and provision. One of the most profound ways God demonstrates His faithfulness is by using our challenges to accomplish His greater purposes. What may feel like a setback to us is often a setup for something greater. God sees the bigger picture, and He uses even the hardest moments of our lives to bring about His plan. Through perseverance, we begin to see glimpses of how He is working all things together for good. Our challenges become testimonies of His faithfulness, stories that inspire and encourage others who are walking through their own struggles. When we rely on God's strength to persevere, we experience His faithfulness in a way that transforms us. It deepens our relationship with Him, strengthens our trust in His promises, and fills us with a peace that doesn't depend on our circumstances. This transformation is not just for our benefit, it's also a reflection of His glory. As we persevere with God's strength, we become a living testament to His faithfulness, showing others that He is a God who never fails and who always provides exactly what we need to keep moving forward. God's grace transforms weakness into strength, reminding us that His power is made perfect in our moments of struggle. In our human frailty, we often encounter situations that highlight our limitations. We may feel inadequate, unsure of our abilities, or burdened by the weight of expectations and challenges. It's in these moments of perceived weakness that God's grace becomes most evident, showing us that His strength is sufficient to carry us through. His grace doesn't just compensate for our shortcomings, it elevates us beyond what we could ever accomplish on our own. Weakness, in many ways, is a doorway to experiencing the fullness of God's grace. When we admit our need for Him, we open ourselves up to His power working within us. The world often tells us to hide our weaknesses, to appear strong and self-sufficient at all times. But God operates differently. He doesn't ask us to pretend we have it all together. Instead, He calls us to come to Him as we are flawed, struggling, and in need of His help. In doing so, we find that His grace meets us exactly where we are, filling the gaps and empowering us in ways we could never imagine. God's grace is not merely a safety net, it is an active force that strengthens and sustains us. It's the reason we can keep moving forward when everything in us wants to give up. It's the gentle reminder that we are not alone, even in our weakest moments. His grace speaks to our hearts, saying, "My child, you don't have to do this on your own. Let me carry you." It's a promise that His power is most evident when we acknowledge our need for Him. This doesn't mean that our struggles disappear, but it does mean that we are no longer defined or defeated by them. God's grace becomes the source of our resilience. When we embrace our weakness and lean into God's grace, we discover a strength that transcends human understanding. This strength doesn't come from striving or trying harder. It comes from surrendering to God's will and trusting in His provision. The Apostle Paul captured this beautifully when he wrote, "When I am weak, then I am strong." It's a paradox that makes sense only in the context of God's grace. Our weakness becomes an opportunity for God's power to shine through, reminding us and others that strength is what sustains us. Grace is also deeply transformative. It doesn't just help us endure challenges, it changes us in the process. When we rely on God's grace, we begin to see ourselves and our circumstances through His perspective. What once seemed like insurmountable obstacles become opportunities for growth and deeper dependence on Him. Weakness becomes less about failure and more about God's ability to work through us despite our limitations. This transformation is not just internal, it's visible to those around us, demonstrating the reality of God's power in our lives. Another remarkable aspect of God's grace is how it equips us to extend that same grace to others. When we experience His strength in our weakness, we develop compassion and empathy for those who are struggling. We become living examples of what God can do, offering hope and encouragement to those who feel overwhelmed by their own limitations. Our testimonies of God's grace in our lives can inspire others to trust Him in their moments of need, creating a ripple effect of faith and transformation. God's grace doesn't eliminate our weaknesses, but it redeems them. It turns what the world sees as a flaw into a vessel for His glory. Through His grace, our struggles become platforms for His strength, and our limitations become opportunities for His power to be displayed. This is the beauty of God's grace. It doesn't just meet us in our need, it lifts us beyond it, reminding us that His strength is more than enough to carry us through anything we face. Through trials, God shapes us, building our character and drawing us closer to His purpose for our lives. Life's challenges are rarely pleasant, yet they hold a profound significance that often becomes clear only with time and reflection. God uses these trials not as punishments, but as tools for growth, refinement, and alignment with His divine plan. When we face difficulties, it's not a sign of God's absence, but rather evidence of His active involvement in our lives, working to mold us into vessels that reflect His glory. Trials have a way of revealing what lies within us. When life is easy, it's tempting to believe that our strength and character are unshakable. But it's during times of adversity that the truth emerges. These moments strip away pretense and self-reliance, exposing our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. This isn't a cause for despair, but an opportunity for God to step in and work within us. He uses trials to bring to the surface areas in our lives that need His healing and transformation. It's through this process that we begin to see His hand at work, shaping us into the people He created us to be. God's shaping often involves a process of breaking and rebuilding. Just as a potter works clay, God sometimes has to reshape us to align with His perfect design. This reshaping can feel uncomfortable or even painful, but it is always done with love and purpose. The potter doesn't discard the clay. Instead, he takes what seems misshapen and transforms it into something beautiful and useful. Similarly, God uses the trials we face to refine our character, teaching us patience, perseverance, and humility. These qualities are not just virtues, they are reflections of God's nature being formed within us. Trials also serve as reminders of our dependence on God. When we encounter challenges that are beyond our ability to handle, we are compelled to turn to Him for strength and guidance. This dependence is not a sign of weakness, but a recognition of where true power and wisdom come from. God desires a deep, personal relationship with each of us, and trials often become the means through which we draw closer to Him. In our moments of struggle, we experience His presence more profoundly, learning to trust Him in ways we might not have otherwise. God's purpose in shaping us through trials goes beyond our individual lives. The lessons we learn and the strength we gain become tools for serving others and fulfilling His mission in the world. As we grow in faith and character, we become better equipped to offer encouragement, wisdom, and support to those who are walking through their own trials. Our experiences, though painful at the time, become testimonies of God's faithfulness and power. They remind others that God is present and active, even in the midst of life's hardest moments. Through trials, we also gain a clearer understanding of God's purpose for our lives. Challenges have a way of redirecting our focus, stripping away distractions, and clarifying what truly matters. They remind us that our ultimate goal is not earthly success or comfort, but alignment with God's will and participation in His kingdom work. This shift in perspective transforms how we approach difficulties, enabling us to see them not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth and deeper connection with God. God's shaping work is never arbitrary. Each trial, no matter how small or large, serves a specific purpose in His plan. He is intentional in how He molds us, using every experience to prepare us for the tasks He has set before us. This preparation is not always easy to recognize in the moment, but it becomes evident as we look back and see how God has been faithful in every step of the journey. His shaping is a demonstration of His love, ensuring that we are ready to fulfill the unique roles He has designed for us. Through trials, we become more than survivors, we become overcomers, strengthened by God's grace and guided by His purpose. The process may be difficult, but the outcome is always worth it. Each challenge refines us, shapes our character, and brings us closer to God's vision for our lives. When we trust God completely, His grace becomes the anchor that steadies us in every storm, providing peace and assurance even when circumstances are chaotic. Trusting God is not always easy, especially when we are surrounded by uncertainty and the weight of our challenges feels unbearable. Yet, it is in these moments of surrender that we experience the fullness of His grace, a grace that sustains us, carries us, and reminds us that He is in control even when life feels out of control. Trusting God begins with a conscious decision to place our faith in His goodness and sovereignty. It's a decision to acknowledge that His plans are higher than our plans, and His ways are beyond our understanding. This trust doesn't erase our questions or eliminate our struggles. Rather, it invites us to rest in the assurance that He is working all things together for our good. His grace becomes a source of strength that enables us to release our grip on the need to control every detail of our lives. It allows us to exhale, knowing that the One who holds the universe also holds us securely in His hands. God's grace is not a passive presence, it is an active force that works within us to provide peace in the midst of life's storms. When we trust Him, His grace calms the fears that threaten to overwhelm us. It doesn't mean the storm disappears, but it does mean that we can face it with a deep-seated confidence that God is with us. This peace is not based on the absence of trouble, but on the presence of God, who promises never to leave us or forsake us. It's a peace that surpasses all understanding, guarding our hearts and minds when logic and reason fail to provide comfort. When life's storms rage, trust in God's grace becomes a choice we make moment by moment. It's a choice to focus not on the size of the waves, but on the power of the One who commands them. Like Peter walking on water, we are called to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, trusting that His grace is sufficient to sustain us, even when the circumstances seem impossible. The storms may test our faith, but they also deepen our dependence on God, teaching us that His grace is not just enough, it is abundant. God's grace anchors us by reminding us of His promises. Throughout Scripture, we see countless examples of God's faithfulness to His people, even in their most trying times. These stories are not just historical accounts, they are reminders that the same God who parted the Red Sea, calmed the storm, and raised the dead is the same God who is present in our lives today. His promises are steadfast and His character is unchanging. Trusting in His grace means clinging to these truths even when our circumstances tempt us to doubt. Trusting God completely also means embracing the mystery of His plan. There will be times when we don't understand why certain things happen or why prayers seem to go unanswered. In these moments, God's grace invites us to trust that He sees the bigger picture, that He is weaving together a story far greater than we could ever imagine. This trust doesn't require us to have all the answers, it simply asks us to believe that God does. His grace assures us that His plans for us are good, even when they don't align with our expectations. As we trust in God's grace, we discover a resilience that comes not from our own strength, but from His. This resilience is not about ignoring pain or pretending everything is okay. It's about standing firm in the knowledge that God is with us and for us. His grace enables us to face each day with courage and hope, knowing that He is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. This trust transforms our perspective, allowing us to see challenges not as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities to grow closer to God and to witness His power at work in our lives. God's grace anchors us not only in our individual storms, but also as part of a larger story. When we trust Him, we become testimonies of His faithfulness, living examples of what it means to rely on His grace. Our trust in God inspires others to do the same, creating a ripple effect of faith and encouragement. In this way, our trust in God's grace becomes a witness to His goodness, drawing others to experience the peace and assurance that only He can provide. His grace steadies us, His promises sustain us, and His love surrounds us, reminding us that we are never alone in life's journey. Thank you.